Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our round 3 live stream for the RSM Classic. Round 2 was an absolute banger for our showdown exposure. Yesterday we had guys like Clanton, O'Bear, Berger all go off for massive days. And whether it was me, other members of the community, looked like a whole lot of us had a good day. So hopefully you guys were able to take advantage yourself. Well, we had over a 4.5 shot advantage if you went out there and played the plantation guys. I didn't anticipate it being that big compared to what we had round 1. It looks like it'd be like a shot and a half, maybe 2 strokes, but we got even more than what we bargained for. So hopefully you guys were able to take advantage out there as well. And let's run it back over here for the weekend. Before we hop on into everything to expect out here for round 3, do want to mention our presenting sponsor here, which are our friends over there at the Ship It Nation. Are all your needs with DFS, whether it's golf, football, like I talk here in the channel, or a variety of different sports like you see on the graphic right there. They've got you covered for NBA, MMA, NHL, MLB, NASCAR, all of those different sort of sports. So if you're looking for an all-encompassing website to give you all those different sort of projections, make sure to check out the guys at Ship It Nation. They, of course, great sponsor here at the channel and have really good stuff over there. Whether you want projections, ownership, or more process-based tips to go out there and become a better DFS player, they've got you covered with all of those sports listed. And the best part about it is, unlike some of these other really big tout sites, they're going to cost you an absolute arm and a leg every single month. The Ship It Nation is a much more reasonable price tag. So it's led by Tambo, Hoop, two great guys out there, also some of the best DFS players that we have in the entire world. So make sure to check out their stuff if you guys haven't already, and use code Luke10 when you guys are signing up, and you'll get a discount off any membership. What's going on, Zach? Seaside got nuked today. Yeah, even as a good thing that they did, right? If you were here for the live stream yesterday, you would have known that. So you can see here at the scoring average, it played 3.36 over par, which was just absolute music to my ears when we woke up this morning. In fact, at one point, it was playing 5.6 strokes over par. Now, towards the end of the day, the conditions really did calm down. So I would say for the last maybe hour and a half of everyone's rounds, you had closer to like 10 miles an hour of wind, which really helped out some of the later starters. So not only if you went with these plantation guys, did you probably have a really good day, but if you also tried to sneak in some of the later starters from plantation, you maybe saw an even larger advantage. So just to show you what I'm talking about there, you can see the plantation course in the morning played about 0.61 strokes under par, but the afternoon wave, which, by the way, this is just the first versus second half of tee times on that golf course. The second half of tee times was a whole 1.5 shots easier. So if you had that kind of foresight to go out there and play the later starters, well, you would have been even more rewarded than if you just went over there and played Seaside. So if we take a look at those scoring averages, it was actually rather consistent as the day went on. If anything, the later starters on Seaside actually got the slightly harder side of it, which doesn't really make sense as conditions did get easier as the day went on, but that could also just be due to variance, right? Same thing over here in Plantation. It was a whole 1.5 shot difference. So I would say that a whole 1.5 shot difference probably isn't due to variance, but this whatever 0.34 shot difference that we had over here in Seaside could have very well been the noise that we have in stats. So the one thing to take away from this is that obviously the place to play at when you have these windy conditions is the plantation course. And we kind of knew what to expect heading into round 2, because round 1, we had a similar type of weather situation, not nearly as drastic as what we had for the second round, but we saw the Seaside play over par as opposed to a whole 1 stroke under there with plantation. So I think if you even used anyone from Seaside, you were absolutely batshit crazy out there for round 2. And with the kind of spread that it actually turned out being, like it was a 4.7 shot advantage between the two golf courses, you were definitely batshit crazy if you went out there and took guys from Seaside. So that's why we ended up having such a good day for Showdown. Obviously, if we sort this by winning score, I mean, O'Bear, Clanton were guys we talked up on stream. Patrick Fishburne, another play that we talked up on the live stream. And of these other guys up here, like Lee Hodges, I played. I had Berger, Highsmith out there in my player pool, Echevarria, Hisatuna, you name it. Pretty much of the guys that shot -6 or better, I had about 90% in my player pool, which is real easy to do when you can see literally every top score. You have to go the whole way down to Mackenzie Hughes, who, by the way, he shot -3 on the Seaside course. Really, really impressive stuff for him, right? That's almost 7 shots gained to the field right there. you have to go the whole way down to -3 before you find any sort of ceiling score. So, sometimes when we have this weather edge, there'll be a few guys that sneak in from the other wave that go out there and kind of throw it off. This was about as pure of a weather edge as you're going to find. Literally everyone that shot -4 or better, -5 or better, you name it, right? You can go the whole way up the board. We're all guys that were playing on the plantation course. So I point that out to show you the power of a weather edge. In this case, the power of having 2 golf courses to choose from. When we get to the Amex in about 2.5 months, it's going to be another talking point that we go through. And Pebble Beach has a multiple course setup. Not waste management. There are a few other events here during the spring that you're going to have multiple golf courses for. When we're playing Showdown, and sometimes it'll be like the first 3 rounds that you have different golf courses in play. It can be as impactful as what we saw out here for round 2. So don't discount any of that sort of stuff. Obviously, it paid off if you listened out there for round 2. But unfortunately, for round 3, we don't have that same kind of situation. So if you don't know, they only play the 1 course out there for Saturday, Sunday. So rather than having Plantation and Seaside to choose from, it's just going to be Seaside out there for Saturday and Sunday. So if we go over here to the weather forecast, you're going to see it looks a lot calmer than what we had for the first 2 days as well. Your sustained winds on this HRRR forecast are sub 10 miles an hour the entire day. And while the wind gusts aren't completely non-existent, they're sub 18 miles an hour for the entire round, which compared to what you had there Thursday, Friday, 18-mile-an-hour wind gusts was what we got this afternoon. When, if we look at the Plantation course averages, it played a whole 2 strokes under par. So clearly got easier as the day went on. And if the whole entire day is going to play with those lower winds, I think you're going to see the scoring averages improve dramatically. So not only because you're going to have the cut line, get some of the out of form, lower tier players out of there, whether it's Siwoo bitch quitting, guys like a Davis Love who clearly was playing injured. You got all of these guys out of the scoring average. So not only are you going to have that improving on this 3 over par scoring average, but also just the winds being a whole lot calmer. So if we go back to Thursday, I think it's a lot more comparable to what we're going to see tomorrow, if not even calmer than this slightly over par scoring average. So it's a par 70. I would say it's going to play to around a 69 scoring average, which would be an entire stroke under par. So even well over a stroke easier than what we had over there on Thursday, partially because of the weather, but the other aspect of that, of course, the strength of field getting better as the week goes on. So in terms of how you're handling your lineups, we do have threesomes off of both tees. So you can see over here on the PGA Tour site that they're going off at 9:10 local time, but it'll be off of holes 1 and holes 10. So there's not going to be a massive advantage to be had when we only have the 1 golf course in play and tee times are so concentrated as they are. So the first tee time's there at 9:10. The last tee time is at 11:11, which, by the way, that's a lucky number. So if you believe in that sort of crap, I don't. I've just heard it from other people. It's interesting that they're going off at 11:11 a.m. And it's also interesting that it's the guys up there in the lead. So if you're a believer in fading the chalk, that's probably not good news out there for your process. But the important aspect here, right, is that it's pretty much 2 hours between the first on tee time and the last tee time, which means that there's not going to be much of an edge to be had. That's about 5-6 holes that the first tee times are going to be playing by the time that the last guys go off, right? And that's as drastic an example as that you can find, right? You're going literally with the first guy versus the last tee time available. At most, they're going to be like halfway done with their round. So if there's going to be an edge, it has to happen in that like 1.5, 2 hour window. And what you see with the forecast for tomorrow is that it doesn't look like that's going to be the case. They're starting around 9 local time, which is right when the winds kick up to that 8 to 10 miles an hour range. And by the time they're finishing, it's going to be in that 8 to 10 miles an hour range for pretty much all of play. The last few finishers will be finishing up around 3-4 p.m. So maybe it will calm down just a little bit there towards the very end of play. But outside of a 1-2 hole difference, you're likely not going to see a massive impact on the scoring. So when we check back on this for round 4, we take a look at the round 3 scoring averages. I would expect to see this playing under par. And for the later starters to maybe get like a quarter of a shot advantage or something like that. Now, a quarter of a shot advantage isn't non-existent. In fact, Some showdown slates, if we really had to try and find an edge, we would probably try and lean into that. The unfortunate part is that your later starters are the guys that are chalky out there for round 3 showdown. So if you went that direction, you would only really want to play the guys that just hardly made the cut and that are going to be teeing off very late as well. So because it is 3 sums off of holes 1 and 10, your last few tee times are still going to be your guys towards the top, but you're also going to have guys going off of hole number 10 that just hardly made the cut, that are going off at the very end of tee times. So I think maybe the way to play the weather edge, if you really want to go after it that way, I don't think it's worth going all in on or anything like that, would be to try and take guys that hardly just made the cut, as they're not going to be nearly as highly owned as some of that chalk that's going off towards the end. And they're going to have maybe better conditions, right? I don't think it's anything that's definitive by any means. I think it's, if anything, it's the last like 3-4 holes that they're going to see that advantage. But just to give you an idea of who those players would be, so going off of hole 10, JT Poston just hardly made the cut. Also Knox and Springer. You got this group here with Carson Young, Tyson Alexander, and Adam Svensson. Worth noting that Svensson, a past champion, could be worth an extra look because of that. You've also got Dirty McGirt there. You got Garrick Higo and Martin Trainer, Henrik Norlander, S.H. Kim, and Kevin Tway. And then, the last group that we'll go through here together is this Taylor Moore, Joel Damon, Lucas Glover group. So, by the way, a few of these guys that we just named are going to be in the highlighted plays that we go through here in a second. That's not really the whole reason that I'm getting to them, but, if you're trying to break a tie between somebody that's got maybe an earlier tee time as opposed to somebody that's in one of the last few groups out, if they've got about the same ownership, the same kind of projection, if you've got to break that kind of tie, I don't think it's the worst idea to go with one of these later tee times. So that's what I'll say about the weather. I don't think it's anything crazy definitive. If you take a look at some of the other forecasts, they look pretty much the same. You can see this NEM forecast gets a little bit calmer towards 3-4 p.m., which will be when those later starters are just finishing up. This Meteo Blue model looks pretty much the same. Yeah, so the same as the first two. Icon model looks the same, and you're noticing the trend, right? It looks towards the end of Saturday, it's really going to get a little bit calmer. So I think if you're going to play any sort of weather edge, that's the best way to go about it. But to go back to these tee times, the other double-edged sword to that, right, is Fishburne, McNeely, Hodges are also going to get the later tee time. And those are some of your most popular plays because of how they played so far. Thorbjornsen, Clanton, extremely chalky, who, by the way, hopefully you guys took advantage of Clanton now, because now he is just royally good chalky out there for round 3. But these kind of guys, Echeverria, ADDC, Callum Turan, all the guys starting on hole 1 late are also going to get that advantage. And the reason why I say it's unfortunate is because they're all coming at inflated ownership numbers. So it's not my favorite slate. It's not like round 2 where I told you guys I thought it was going to be a really good slate for us, and it ended up being a really good slate for us out there. This one feels a little bit more typical, right? It's, you play your game theory, maybe you go after some of these later starters, but nothing like we had for round 2, unfortunately. I wish they could all be like that. I wish we could go out there and just print every single slate, but that's not reality, right? There's got to be down slates for you to have the up ones, and let's try and squeeze out what we can from this. What's going on, Sully? Smash a like button, everyone. He said, "What's up, Luke?" First off, doing well. Glad that you're tuning on in, Sully. And smash a like button, boys, if you haven't already. You got burnt today. You said Luke got burnt today? I don't know about that, buddy. We went out there and absolutely smashed today. So I don't know what kind of reefer you're smoking and what kind of drugs you're on, but enjoy the ban bun, dude, I guess. Gosh, you got to wonder what's going through some people's minds. That's all I'll say. All right, let's talk about this top end of the board. So we're going to go through a few plays that I like out here for tomorrow. This isn't to give you guys the nuts out there for Showdown. Now, if you took who I played out there today, you probably did have the nuts out there in Showdown, but I'm not always going to get it 100% correct. So obviously take these plays with a little bit of an asterisk. What I more so want you guys to take away from this section of this live stream is what I'm looking for in players. And I'll try and hammer that home as much as humanly possible. This is meant to be a peek behind my process and what I'm doing for any given slate. So trying to give you guys a little bit of an idea of, what I'm looking for in players, whether it's shots gained metrics, whether it's course history, whether it's low ownership, that sort of thing out there in plays. That is far more important than someone just giving you a play for any given slate. First off, the person giving you that play may or may not be right about what they're saying, including myself, where I get things wrong here all the time. I get things right too. I like to pat myself on the back, but you've got to humble yourself when you get things wrong as well. And no matter who you're getting the plays from, myself included, right? I'll include myself in that list. They might be right, they might be wrong, right? The more important aspect is what they're looking for in their plays. If they're a winning player, you want to know what they're looking for in their plays. So the idea here, right, is to give you that perspective. So let's go through a few plays towards the top. So Brian Harman would be one of my preferred spend ups. He's got some ownership behind him, mostly because people are just spending their salary out there in lineups. People are going to get to these 9, 10K guys just by default. You're not going to go and leave like $6,000 on the table. People just don't do that in practice when going out there and building. So Brian Harman, I mean, if he was like a 7K golfer, based on the fact that he's -2, he hardly made the cut, he'd probably be like 5 to 10% owned. Now, because he's up here in the 10K range, it's Brian Harman, major champion, right? He gets some respect because of that kind of name recognition. He's about 17.6% owned, which looks high because we have all these other numbers blacked out on here. But an Aubert is over 30%, just to give you a little bit of a peek behind the projection veil. Of course, guys, these projections are posted on my Patreon page. Everything that's blacked out, you can find on there. But an Aubert is like 30%. I've got a Davis Thompson at about the same ownership level as a Brian Harman here. I've got Denny McCarthy a little bit chalkier, and especially when you get down to this like Mav McNeely range, Mackenzie Hughes, they're well over 20% ownership. A Luke Clanton, nearly 30% owned out there in GPPs. A Patrick Rogers, well over 20% ownership in GPPs. When you look at it and you have some perspective, right? You look at it in respect to some of the other players around him, this 17.6% number is not really that bad when it's all said and done. Part of the reason that these ownership numbers, by the way, are a little bit higher out there for round 3 showdown is he had some 9 and 10K guys go out there and miss the cut. So for example, like a Siwoo Kim went out there and missed the cut. A lot of other guys up here towards the top that ended up not making it to Saturday, Sunday, that is just going to condense things a little bit. When you don't have as many choices up there in that 9 and 10K range, the average ownership is going to increase on players in that range. So the reason why I like Harman, by the way, he's a local guy. He plays this golf course, this event every single year. He's had mixed success. He's had a few years where he's really taken advantage, and he's had a few years where it hasn't gone his way. Last year would be one of the down years there, but that T44, but he has a T2 finish. He had that T14 back there in 2020. And then you see some of the ugly as well, right? T61, that's really bad for Harman standards, well below his standards. The missed cut in 2021 obviously wasn't his best performance. So you've got some evidence of him really playing well at this golf course. And what you'll see in the years where he finished T2, he finished T14, is he really took care of the Seaside golf course, which makes sense as it's one of the shortest tracks that we have on all the PGA Tour schedule. Somebody like Brian Harman's more of a precision player off the tee, a really good wedge player, which if you've taken a look at the RSM Classic before, specifically the Seaside course, you'll see that there's a lot of sub 400 yard par fours. And that's really where Brian Harman separates himself from the rest of the field. So now that we're back on the Seaside course, Plantation today, I thought he was a decent play, used him out there in lineups. But for Seaside course with slightly calmer conditions, I actually think it's a really good setup out there for Brian Harman. So at -2, just to double check his tee time, let me do that real quickly for you guys. I know he's towards the latter half of tee times, but let me give you guys his exact starting time. So he's starting at 9:43, so that's pretty much smack dab in the middle of all of those tee times. So I don't know if I could call him a later starter, so I guess I'll go ahead and take that back. But he's got the low ownership that I'm looking for, and mostly that course history. If you're going to try and find a reason to go out here and play, guys, it's either course history or it's the shots gained metrics. And the one thing I'll say about the shots gained metrics is that we do only have it for one of the first 2 rounds. They only have the ShotLink lasers over there at Seaside. They're not available on Plantation. So if you look at the shots gained metrics, they're not going to be as reliable as per usual. Like if for a round 3 showdown slate, a lot of times we'll have 2 full rounds of shots gained metrics to work with. So don't get too in love with some of your stats over the first 2 days. I think if you're going to use it to break a tie, that makes sense. If you're going to use it to be like the cherry on top, to go out there and get to one play versus another, like I think that's the kind of place where you use the shots gained metrics. But this isn't like your usual round 3 showdown where it's like, cool, we have 36 entire holes of shots gained metrics to look at. Let's find the best ball strikers, because you're only getting half the equation. if you do that at this point. So I just think it could be a little bit misleading if you do that too much. You'll see me reference the shots gained metrics here with a few plays, but maybe not as much as usual, just because of the fact they only have it for a few rounds. You had great picks. Thank you, Nicholas. And yeah, I don't know what that other guy was saying, dude. I don't know. I just shake my head at this point. I'm used to it, right? I've been doing this for like 4 years. I've had more than my fair share of trolls. I genuinely wonder what goes through their head. It's like, dude, like, you got nothing else to do? Like, go and just like hang out with your bros. You don't got to be a dick to people online, right? Let's go down to this 8K range. So moving on from that, it's worth noting that the really popular guys that you might want to think twice about playing. And by the way, just because I say think twice about playing does not mean that you have to fade all of these players. And the next 5-6 guys that I talk about, I'll tell you right now, I'm playing 2 of them out there in my lineup. So I'm going to have 2 pieces of chalk towards the top end of the board. But as it implies with like the other 6 guys that we talk about, I'm fading 4 of these 6 players. So the really chalky guys would be an Aubert. He's over 30%. McNeely, I think we pointed him out before. Hughes, Luke Clanton, Patrick Rogers, and then Patrick Fishburne down here at -11. All the guys towards the top end of the leaderboard that are getting by far the most ownership of anyone in this field. So as mentioned, I am playing a few of them out there in my lineups, but I'm being careful about it. Because if you're going to get over the field on a 20-25%er, that's playing them in nearly half your lineups, which is a pretty scary thing to want to go out there and do. So I'm trying to be a little bit more reasonable out there with my ownership, fading a lot of those guys towards the top, because without like the obvious course edge, without a massive weather edge to go out there and try and lock in, you've got to find something to go out there and generate EV. And for me out here for our lineups in Showdown, it's going to be game theory. It's going to be going out there, taking a stand to get against the rest of the field and just relying on the variance and the chaos that is golf. I've also gotten Eric Cole here at $8,700. So I've got him at about 15% ownership. So he's still getting quite a bit of attention himself. But what I like about Eric Cole is his track record at this event. He doesn't have a massive sample size, but if you take a look, he went 3rd place last year. That's great. He had a really good Saturday, Sunday at the Seaside course. And then T39 over there 2 years ago. So obviously the T3 is the highlight of those 2 starts. And at the Seaside course is really where he's made his hay over his first 2 starts at this event. So kind of like a Brian Harman, it makes sense given the course fit. Eric Cole's more of a positional player off the tee, really good iron player, really streaky putter. And when you put him on Bermuda grass, he usually has some of his better performances out there on tour. He's maybe not the best putter on like POA, things like bent grass, so on and so forth, but you put him on that familiar Bermuda grass that he puts on down here in Florida all the time, then he's going to have a pretty good week out there on those greens. So $8,700 there at -2. He's got one of those middle tee times, just like a Brian Harman. So maybe not getting that potential weather edge that you get towards like the very last hour and a half of tee times, but a low-owned play that I'll take a shot on. So you're not always going to get that late tee time like you will here with our next play, though. Lucas Glover is going off in one of the last few groups. He's $7,800, which for the guy who's #1 in my model this week, #1 in recent form ranking, is ludicrous, right? The #1 play in the field, obviously, a lot of it was fall series events. Ludwig's a better player than Lucas Glover. I think we can all agree on that. But the guy who's #1 in recent form, he's been playing the best golf, really, of anyone in this field, is $7,800. And he's got the nutted tee time out there at -1, lower ownership, so 12.5%. It's not like he's unowned here at $7,800. But compared to Patrick Fishburne, he's like half the ownership. Compared to Michael Thor Bjornsson, he's just over half the ownership of somebody like Thor. I'd rather have Lucas Glover, who, in terms of projection, by the way, if you compare his projected fantasy points to Fishburne, Glover is absolutely lapping Fishburne. You compare it to Thor, I think he's got nearly a 10 points higher projection than what you have there with Thor Bjornsson. So, Lucas Glover is the best play in this range if you just look at my projections, and also one of the lower owned options as well. So he's the kind of play that I'm looking to get to. You get a little bit of that potential weather edge, and more importantly, low ownership on a guy that projects through the roof. You've also got Austin Smotherman as a play that I want to point out here. So I've got him at about 4.1% projected ownership there. What I like about Smotherman too is that he's an aggressive player. And if you've been paying attention this fall swing, I mean, he's been making the cut almost every single week. He's not doing anything super sexy with those starts. But if you take a look at the form, I think it'll impress you, or at least it impressed me when I went out there and I looked at some of his starts. So let me scroll down here and find him. He was $6,700 for main slate. He did have one withdrawal in there mixed in, but T55, missed cut, T42. And then if you keep going back, it's just a bunch of like T35, T42, T35. And when you take a look at the last 24 round baseline, so you take a look at the shots gained metrics, the ball striking is how he's getting it done. And this is why I'll take a shot on him out here for round 3 showdown. He's a high birdie percentage player, and he's a ball striker at heart. You can see here, gains off the tee, gains about 3/4 of a stroke per round when it comes to his approach play. Maybe not the best short game player, but you'll take a shot on a guy like that out there for showdown, because really all he has to do to go out there and run the table is find a hot putter, which is far from a for sure prospect, right? It's why we're playing DFS. It's why they call this gambling, right? You've got to go out there. You've got to take a chance in some spots. But when you can find a hot putter with a ball striker like a Smotherman, and there are countless other examples of guys like this, like a Joe Highsmith, he's a lot chalkier than what you have for Smotherman. So that's why we're talking about a Smotherman here and not a Joe Highsmith. Joe Highsmith, one of the best ball strikers that you have on the PGA Tour, just normally can't make a putt for his life. Now, recently, Highsmith has been a much better putter because of, and that's why his form has gotten a lot better. So you take a look at it, for example, right? Still doing his ball striking thing, but gaining with the putter. The difference here out here for round 3 showdown is that Smotherman is not getting that kind of love. I've got Highsmith at closer to 10% ownership. Same thing with the Daniel Berger. Like, I like Berger out there for round 3. Obviously took advantage out there for round 2, but these kind of guys are like 10 to 12%. Austin Smotherman is being completely overlooked because he's so much more expensive now than what he was out there for main slate, which could be looked at as a negative, but I would say it's actually a positive for him, because if he was like $6,700 like he was for main slate, there's a chance that Austin Smotherman is like 7 to 10% owned, right? Double the ownership of what you have here in the 7K range, which would make him a completely different play out there for GBP. So high birdie percentage player, really good ball striker, all things that I'm looking for in plays. And Adam Schenk has had a decent start when it comes to the shots gained metrics. So, of course, it's only for one of the 2 rounds, so we have to take it with a grain of salt. But his shots gained approach and his shots gained off the tee were well into the positive on the Seaside course. He's sub 5% owned. He's only $6,900, so he's giving you quite a bit of salary savings. And what I really like about Adam Schenk is that long-term, this is a guy he's like a near tour winner, right? He's had multiple runner-up finishes. He's had a bunch of top 5s over the last 3 seasons. The last 6 months have not been kind to Adam Schenk. It's been probably his worst stretch of form that he's ever had as a professional, but lately has started to show us a little bit of glimpse of what we saw in the past. And this kind of play is not the kind of player that I'd be using in main slate. Like, Adam Schenk just has too much volatility for me at this stage to go out there and use him over 4 lineups, or 4 rounds, I should say. But I will use him out there for the showdown format, where he's just got to keep it together for 18 holes. So he's an example of a lower owned pivot that I'm getting to try and offset some ownership towards the top end of the board. Patton Kizzire at 2.1%. I gave you guys Clanton as my favorite play on the slate yesterday. My favorite play for tomorrow's slate is going to be Patton Kizzire. And he's super cheap. He's $6,800. And that's really half the reason that he's my top play here. There is absolutely no reason that Patton Kizzire, who's been in one of the best stretches of form that he's ever had in his entire career, should be a 6K range golfer at the RSM Classic, a place of which he's had really good form in the past, by the way, and is also a resident of Sea Island. So very familiar with the kind of conditions that he's been seeing this week. I know it hasn't been a sexy score there at -2, but he's 2.1% owned. He was my number 11 model ranking play out there in the entire field. You can see he's good on Bermuda grass. There's just, I thought Patton at this kind of price tag would probably be like 10% owned, but I've got him at 2.1% right now. So if that ends up holding, we get him at 2% out there in GPPs, I'm going to be ecstatic about that. So I'll probably have 15 to 25% Patton Kizzire. When I give you guys one of these conviction plays, I don't play it like a little bitch. Right? I go out there, I get well over the field on it. And yeah, he's going to be one of those big stains for me out there in Showdown. Then the last play I want to point out here is going to be Christo Lamprecht at 6,600. He's not somebody I feel nearly as confident in as a Pan Kazire, but this is that outside the box play that I sometimes hit you guys with. Whether it was a Shabankar Sharma at the Open Championship, right? He shot like -5, something like that, round 2 when he went out there early. Christo Lamprecht is that same kind of player. And funny enough, he has shown up at some of the Open Championships over the last few years. He's a super long player. He just graduated from Georgia Tech. He might not have graduated. He may have just left college early to go and become professional. But he's one of the longest players that we have in the entire world. By the way, he's like literally like 7 foot tall. I think he's like 6'9", 6'10", as close as you can get to 7 feet without being 7 feet tall. And he hits the ball a whole long way. So I don't think it's the best course fit for him over there on the Seaside course. But I think that Christo is just a much better player than the price tag would indicate. In fact, I think that he's the kind of talent level of these 9K golfers. Like, I think he's probably someday, probably like a year and a half from now, going to be like an 8, 9K golfer in this sort of field very early into his career. The reason I say that is if you take a look at the collegiate standings, he's up there in the top 3 of all of the standings. He's been towards the top, isn't going to get his tour card via that promotion as he was just beaten out by Thor Bjornsson and I believe one other player that took second place. But he's up there towards the top. He's clearly a very talented player. And at the Open Championship, you've seen this guy be first-round leader, right? You're not the first-round leader at St. Andrews by being an absolute slapdick, right? You've got to have a high pedigree to go out there and have that kind of round. And if he can go super low around a major championship setup golf course, I don't care if it's not a good setup for him. I mean, St. Andrews is not even a good setup for him in terms of setup, if we're being honest. I don't care if it is not a good golf course for him. He's just a really good player if he can go out there and be first-round leader at a major. So 1.8% projected ownership, essentially being unowned. If you're looking to get different down low, obviously Kazire is probably my favorite play, but a Lamprecht there at $6,600 could also be a potential option to do so. So the idea with all these plays, of course, right, is to give you a little peek behind the process. And you can tell pretty much every play that we went through here was at most maybe about average ownership out there for any given range. And in most cases, they were all pivots compared to the guys that we had around them. Reason for that is we don't have a massive course edge to go off of, not a massive weather edge that we can really lean on. So what you do in that kind of situation to go out there and generate EV is you have to bet against the rest of the field, right? You're playing a game in these GPPs, these contests against other entries that have the same exact player pool as you. You've got to go out there and you've got to try and beat those people. So that's what you're doing by taking the lower owned players. So you're playing the games, as some people would say, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we go through the lineup construction segment. So let me bring up DraftKings. We'll talk through that real quickly and keep this thing going. And yeah, Rip Wesley, huh? He ended up losing his tour card. That was tough to watch out there today. There's a few other guys that are also going to miss out on their tour card, which it's tough to see, especially for a few of them that I liked watching, like Wesley, of course. Love his YouTube content, love seeing all that, but I guess we're not going to see it on the road anymore. So hopefully he gets some like sponsorship invites. I'm sure he'll get a few here in 2025. But it would have been nice to see him with full-time status. So what we're going to do before we talk about the prop side of things over here on Underdog and PrizePicks is I do want to go through some lineup construction stuff. So after you've built a player pool, that's what we just did by going through all of that together. You've done most of the legwork, just like we had out there for round 2. For a round 3 showdown, we're thinking about a lot of the same, which really is just making sure that we're not too chalky with our build. We've already done all the searching for players. All we have to do now is, and the reason why we're trying to make sure our ownership's not too high is we don't want to duplicate ourselves with other lineups in our contest. And we want to give ourselves an opportunity to actually move up those leaderboards when our players are getting there. When they're giving us that like -5, -6 round, we ideally don't want to be holding hands with like 20, 25% of the field. So what you do when you're building a lineup is you just be very intentional about where you're getting different. And a good way to do this, maybe if you're like new to DFS, is just to crank out your leverage right off the bat. So we're going to assume that this is like for the big GPP. So not for like 100 entry contest like this, like you have for round 3, for something a little bit larger where you're trying to worry about the ownership a little bit more. If that's the case, we want 2, 3 pivots, if not 3 or 4 out there in our build. So let's go and find 3 pivots to go and just knock into the lineup right away. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take a Lucas Glover, who's about 12% owned. I wouldn't call him like a true pivot, but compared to the guys around him, he is lower owned than a lot of the other guys. So we're going to take him. We're going to take a Smotherman at about 4%. And then we're going to play Pan Kazire. He was down here at 2%. So that's 3 pivots right there. I think we could probably try and squeeze in one more towards the latter half of our lineup. But let's see what the rest of the lineup construction looks like. So now we're going to go back up here towards the top, take a few players with some ownership. So I'm going to throw in a Brian Harmon here. Second man in, I'm going to throw in a Harris English here at $8,900. And you can see we have 9,300 remaining. And because we already have our pivots in here, we have Glover, Smotherman, and Kazire all getting us different to the field. Even if we wanted to spend all of our salary and take a Matt Wallace, or even leave the $200 on the table and take a nearly 30% of Mav McNeely, you could probably get away with that out there in the large field GPP. Now, what I would rather prefer to do is to kind of change it up a little bit. So the way that I would do it is I'd probably go a little bit more expensive to stay away from these guys that are a little bit chalkier. So like maybe I would spend up and take a Ben Griffin there at -1. He's not going to be super chalky out there for tomorrow. And that leaves our last man in now down here at $8,600 and away from those guys that were like 25% owned. So now you're down here at -2. I guess you could take Novak as your last man in. It'd be a little bit chalkier with an Eckroyd or a Rogers, but you are leaving, what is it, $300 on the table if you went to Patrick Rogers. So I think just like that other lineup construction that we had, you could probably get away with it if you took Patrick Rogers as your last man in. But just for the sake of this, I think I'm going to stretch it even more, actually. I think I'm going to go up here. We're going to take Davis Thompson at 10,200, actually. So this will be a double 10K lineup. You got Harmon there, Davis Thompson, who's also relatively low owned. And now that puts us down at $8,000. And the reason I wanted to do that is, like, we could have taken Novak. I guess we could have left some salary on the table and taken Patrick Rogers. But my inclination with building that lineup was almost to take Doug Gim, because Doug Gim, at least in my opinion, my projections back this up, by the way, he's pretty much the same play as all these guys here. They're all like within a point or two projection over there with my fantasy point projection. And if Doug Gim, and out of these players, by the way, Doug Gim is by far the lowest owned out of those 4 players. I'd almost rather have Doug Gim at the lower ownership than any of these other guys. And if that's going to save me enough salary to spend up for a $10,200 Davis Thompson, I'd rather have this lineup out there in the large field GPP, because not only are we getting one of the top tier players now out here in this lineup, but you're essentially not giving up any projection to take a lower owned Doug Gim. So what we did with this lineup is we went out there and we tried to find the fine balance between projection and ownership. The idea is to try to maximize our projection by trying to minimize our ownership. And this kind of build, this kind of lineup construction is exactly what you're getting with that. So that's what I'm looking for out there in my round 3 showdown lineups. We don't have a massive course edge to go after, so they've got to try and find some way to go out there and squeeze out profit. For me, it's usually going out there and betting against the rest of the field, which is why having ownership projections like we have over here at the Patreon page is so nice to have over here. So make sure to check the Patreon page out if you guys haven't already. Of course, that's where I'm posting all of these spreadsheets. On there, everything that is blacked out won't be blacked out. So it has all my projected ownership on there, player pool for every single showdown slate, projected points, all of the shots gained stuff that you guys see throughout my content, all available for you guys over there. So to do that, by the way, check out the link in the description of the live stream to go out there and join that. It's $15 a month. That gives you access to not only the showdown stuff as we talked about here, but also all the main slate content for every single golf tournament. So obviously it's maybe not the best time of the year to go out there and join, just because this is the last main event that we have for a couple weeks. We do have the Hero World Challenge that we'll be covering here on the channel as well, obviously. But yeah, when 2025 comes around, make sure you guys are a part of the Patreon for sure. You want to be a part of it by then to make sure you're getting all this content throughout all of the season. And yeah, it's where you can find all the showdown stuff throughout the rest of this weekend. Let me bring up Draftkings. We're going to go through some prop stuff now. And after I go through some comments. Nick says, thank you for doing everything I do. No one else takes the time to break down the showdown. I appreciate that. Yeah, it can be a grind sometimes, right? Doing a live stream for every single event, but I know no one else is doing it. I'm very passionate about it. If I wasn't doing live streams, I would still be deep diving the showdown slates, the prop slates just as hard. So, you know, if I'm going to be that passionate about it, I'm still going to do all that stuff. why not do live streams for you guys? So it takes away from some of the stuff I want to go out and do with like my friends and family sometimes, but that's why we do these earlier. So I can get them out of the way and then still enjoy myself afterwards. So I appreciate that, man, and the kind words and whatnot. You were holding up top 5 for a while until you got passed up in the GBP. Sounds like something I'm very familiar with, happening a lot. You said, shout out to your boy Woodland for almost making a miracle, and shout out to your 80% Cebu. Jesus Christ. Yeah, Cebu 80%. You've got a lot more stones than me, my friend. I'll just say Siwoo Kim is the kind of guy I max out at like 25% because he does this shit all the time. If he doesn't have a good week, he's either walking off the golf course like you saw today, or he's shooting like +8 and missing the cut. So yeah, maybe that's one to kind of learn from, Phil. I'm trying to give you some tough love right here. If you're playing 80% of Cebu, you're doing something wrong. It should never happen. The only reason you should be getting 80% Cebu is if you forgot to set your lineups. You had 5 minutes to go out there and get them in on DraftKings, and you had to go out there and just hit optimize and update lineups. That is the only excuse in the world you have for playing 80% Cebu, because if you did that, for lack of a better word, you're a dumbass. I think that's fair to say. So just learn from it, right, Phil? You need some tough love sometimes. 80% Cebu, you deserve it right there. And are we going to Plantation again? No, because it's not in play for rounds 3 and 4. So I would recommend, Phil, go back to the beginning of the live stream. I touch on all of that. So I'm not going to do the whole spiel again about the weather, the golf courses and whatnot. For that, Phil, go back to like minute 3 or 4 in the live stream and you'll be able to catch all of that. Because yeah, if you think that Plantation's in play, you're way, way behind. You got a lot to catch up on, my man. But yeah, let me know if you have any questions when you get to that. Let's talk through some prop stuff now. So props for round 3, I'm actually pretty excited about, just because the conditions are going to change quite a bit. And a lot of times what you see with these prop sites is that when you have conditions drastically changing from day to day, is they don't necessarily account for it as much as they should. Now, that's not always the case. Like there's going to be slates where maybe they over account for it from time to time. But the reason I say that is most of the time they under account for it. So I haven't seen any of the projections yet. I do have some of the sportsbook lines up, so we can use that for comparison. But we're going to take a look at Prize Picks and Underdog and see what they've done with their projections, because I think they could go a few different ways with it. So they have nothing up on Prize Picks yet. And by the way, if they're waiting for my like thoughts on this, they did this last time. So the last time they didn't have a board up and I gave my thoughts on the board, they posted it like 30 minutes after the live stream ended. And it was essentially the exact projections that I mentioned. If they're going to do that, I don't think I'm going to say anything about props, guys. And I hope you understand, because what I was just about to say, right, is that these prop sites, sometimes they don't know what to do when they get conditions that change like this. And you'll see it with the sports books too, right? So we don't have anything on Prize Picks Underdog right now. I'm going to hold off from commenting on those two because I don't want to give them any ideas. But let's look at what the sports books have posted, right? There's no harm in looking at this DraftKings and FanDuel stuff. So you can see they have guys at like 68.5. Just to remind yourselves, we're all on Seaside, right? There's no Plantation Saturday and Sunday, just for clarification right there. So you have these guys at 1.5 under par is where they have these projections. And you can see with the sportsbook juice over here, it's like -150 under. So, McCarthy, they're essentially saying is about a -2 projection. Same thing with Brian Harman, right? He's -150 for the under. I mean, it's not actually them saying that he's going to shoot -2, but that's pretty much what they're implying there with that -150 odds. You've got Aubert. He's at 67.5 and closer to even money. I would say if I had access to DraftKings, FanDuel, whoever has these odds up, I'd probably bet that under on Aubert to shoot -3. Which, speaking of, let me see what he is over here on FanDuel. So yeah, on FanDuel, he's only -115. They go under 67.5. If I had a sports book, I don't have access to FanDuel or DraftKings down here in Florida. If I was able to bet that on Aubert, I probably would. And I guess by saying that, I guess I'm tipping my hand a little bit too much for what I kind of want to see on Underdog and Prize Picks. But the last few times this happened where Prize Picks was gun shy about posting a board, Underdog ended up posting a board first, which usually doesn't happen. Usually Underdog waits for Prize Picks to post, and then we'll just copy and paste their board and post it. But if Prize Picks isn't posting, this has actually happened a few times this fall, Underdog will just post their own projections. And what we've seen with Underdog posting their own projections is that they're absolute clowns about it. Like they post like the most mispriced board that you've ever seen. So yeah, this won't load for some reason. I'm not sure what Underdog has going on right now, but if that ends up happening, if Prize Picks doesn't post theirs and Underdog is first to post, I'm going to be very happy about the potential value that we get there. So what I'll say about conditions, though, this won't give away too much, I guess, over here in Prize Picks Underdog, is that, yeah, I'd be betting some unders on strokes. If you couldn't tell, I think conditions are going to be significantly easier. And because these sites don't always account for it properly, I think there could be some value on taking some of these unders. Now, it depends on the pricing. If we're getting guys like Denny, Brian Harbin at like 67.5, then, maybe there's value on the over as opposed to taking value on the under. If we get them at 68.5, like you have here on the sports books, then maybe I do take some unders. Like you would see here with the sportsbook line value. We'll have to see what these sports books end up giving us. I would guess, by the way, that guys like Denny McCarthy, Brian Harmon are probably going to be at 68 strokes. I would guess that Aubert is going to be at 67.5. Usually, right, the sportsbook line value is what these sites make their lines off of. And if that's going to be the case, they're going to have a lot of these guys like a Davis Thompson, Harmon, McCarthy, all at about 68 strokes. You maybe have guys like an Eckroyd at 68.5, who's maybe like a step down in talent level from some of those other top tier guys. Yeah, if they end up posting the board to like account for these sportsbook odds, I would probably still take unders. And the reason why I say that is like, I think the Aubert one's like a great example, right? Like even here at 67.5, if I think the scoring average is going to be -1, that's asking Aubert to gain 2 strokes to the field, which in an elite tier PGA Tour event would be maybe asking a little bit too much, as he averages like 1.5 shots gained per round. So, getting to 2 in an elite tier field would probably be a sub 50% outcome. But in this kind of field, fall series event, weak as hell here during the FedEx Cup fall, him gaining 2 strokes to the field is an over 50% kind of outcome. So I'm kind of hoping that we get this 67.5 line in Aubert, but maybe we get some better lines on guys like Brian Harmon. You guys know I really like over there for fantasy as well. So let me see. Let's refresh Prize Picks once more. Maybe they've got something posted for us, but if not, we might be shit out of luck. And that's surprising to me. I went live at the same time we did yesterday. And at the same exact time, we had both boards posted, both for Prize Picks and Underdog. And today they've got nothing posted, which maybe they got their asses handed to them. So maybe that's why. I didn't do it, that's for sure. I didn't have a great prop day, but maybe other people did, and that's why. Alrighty, I think that's all we got for the live stream, guys. I can't sit here forever and wait for them to post a board. What I'll say about these prop boards, though, is that you can find all my analysis over there on my Patreon page, but I think it's going to be some unders on strokes and some overs on birdies that would make sense. If they give us 3.5 birdie lines, I'm going to especially like that. But even 4 birdie lines for some of like the better players in the field, I might be considering taking some overs there. So I think you're going to see some adjustment for the conditions made as you've seen like the sports books start to do themselves. But especially like with the birdie lines, these strokes lines, they're going to have a lot to compare to. Like, for example, they have DraftKings, FanDuel has their stuff posted. They're going to have a pretty good barometer of like where the industry is set at. The birdie or better lines, though, they might not have as good a grasp on it. So if we get guys at like 3.5 and 4, and by elite tier players, I guess just to give you like an idea, like you give me a Mackenzie Hughes at 3.5 birdies, like I'll take an over on that. You give me an Adam Svensson at 3.5 birdies for tomorrow, like I'll take an over on that. Like a Daniel Berger for that tier player, I'll take an over on. Obviously, if they're giving us like a Davis Thompson, if they're giving us like a Denny McCarthy at 3.5 birdies, like one of those top tier players, I would definitely take them for the over at 3.5. But I think that's a pipe dream, right? They're going to be at least at 4 birdies if I had to imagine. But like a Ben Griffin, he's like another one of those 3.5s. By the way, he didn't go over 3.5 today, which was kind of unfortunate for the prop that I took for Ben Griffin. And if they gave it to us again with the calmer conditions expected for Saturday, I'd run it back for sure over there with props. So hopefully it gives you a little taste for what I'm doing over there on the props. For all the stuff I get to as I enter it, make sure to check out the Patreon page for that. Just like the DFS tier, I also have a tier over there for the prop side of things with all my Underdog and Prize Picks exposure. It's $15 a month for that as well. So I do it for every single round, rounds 1 through 4, always posting not only my exposure out there on each site, you get my reasoning for every single slip, the idea behind the lineup construction, the slip construction out there with each slip as well. A lot of that will teach you how to find the best payout depending on the site that you're entering on. And then I also give you guys all voice crack there. Let me get a sip of this, huh? What the hell was that? You also get all the stat averages over there on my Patreon page too. So I post all the averages for the PGA Tour, DP World Tour over there to help you guys out with your process. So that's what this screenshot is from the round 2 averages that were posted there on the Patreon page. All of that, make sure to check it out in the link in the description of the video. But that's all I've got, guys. I appreciate you guys stopping by. Best of luck with all of your exposure out there for Saturday, and maybe make moving day one to remember.